G'day, Marie. Welcome to Landscape Photography World. Lovely to have you on the show. Thank you for being my guest this week.
Thank you for having us, Grant. I'm excited.
Oh, so am I. I'm very excited to have a chat to you. Why don't we start with who is Marie Gardner?
That's the existential question, isn't it? No, an author, a photographer, a documentary producer, and soon to be a full-time student.
Wow. Okay. There's a lot on your plate there.
It's a busy time.
It's always good to be busy. Let's go back in history a little bit and talk about what made you start photography, and in particular landscape photography. What was it that put the idea in your head that landscape photography was the way to go?
I was interested in photography when I was a kid. I had one of those, I don't know if you remember them, the long panoramic film cameras, cheap and nasty camera, but took interestingly landscape long pictures.
Yeah,
so
I know.
For a little while. Yeah, I think every kid had one. So I was interested then, but it didn't really continue. And then I was given a camera as a present for my 21st birthday. And it was a sort of bridge camera. So it was nice. I forget the make of it. It was like a Sony or something.
Sure.
And I started using that quite a lot. And then quickly discovered its limitations and thought there's more that I want to do that I can't do with this bridge camera. And so I saved up and bought a Nikon D90, which is obviously like an intermediate DSLR, as I'm sure everyone knows. And that was great because all of a sudden I had access to all of these lenses and all of the possibilities. And I got really into macro photography, actually. I really enjoyed doing macro photography because it was something that I could do in the house. So I would go into the garden and pick flowers and things and bring them into the house, and I would take close-ups of them. And I was really awful at that for a while. And then as you practice more and more, you get better and you think, oh, maybe I can do some other types of photography. And it went from there, really. And I also like to be outdoors. I like to walk in pretty places, as I'm sure most people do. And so, of course, you take the camera and you start to take photographs while you're walking. And it developed from there. But business-wise, when me and my partner first set up in business, I actually tried wedding photography, which I feel like is maybe a phase that a lot of photographers go through. And then a lot of them quickly discover that I don't want to do wedding photography. It was really stressful.
I had some photographer friends that were wedding photographers. I knew when I decided to go into business, wedding photography wasn't going to be a part of it.
Yeah, I quickly discovered that wedding photography was not for me. My love of people did not really translate into photography. I didn't want to spend hours and hours herding everybody who were in various stages of inebriation together to get pictures that they're going to have for the rest of their lives, hopefully. So that was not for me. So I quickly left that. But the majority of our sort of business has been writing and documentary, which also then brings in the photography. So it became really useful that I already had these photography skills and I was able to pair them with things like writing for magazine articles and things like that. So I could write about a place, but I could also then take the photographs of that place. And I think that just made a bit of a better package for editors to be able to say, yeah, she can do both. So why not hire her?
Yeah, nice. And I guess, was it always something that you saw as being artistic and something creative, or was it more, as you said there, more documentary focused where you're documenting a place or documenting a town or an area or something and just trying to capture the essence of that and show that to people? Or was it about trying to make it something more than that?
I think initially it did come out of, I have a love of documentary in whatever form that may be. And I think in terms of the landscapes, it was an extension of that. So I wanted to document place without people, but also still opening up those questions of who lived here? Why does this landscape look like this? What is that ruin? Why is it there? So I think it was more documentary. I've never rejected the artistic label. I don't volunteer it, but I think obviously any kind of photography is a form of art and a form of creativity. It's not how I'd first describe what I do, but I'll accept it gratefully if somebody else says it.
I'll be happy to say that. It's definitely artistic as far as I'm concerned. A lot of that comes with both the composition, but also the way that the photography is presented and the art in and of itself around putting together that body of work, for, say, for an article, for example, if you're documenting a place. to me, that actually takes quite a bit of creativity to say, okay, these are the things that are actually the essence of this place. Is that something that you focus on in your work particularly?
I think that's what you said is spot on, because you can document something simply by taking a picture of it, but you're not necessarily being artistic with that. But then you can also document a place and you start to think about, why is this more than just a photograph of that place? This is more than something that might appear in a technical manual or an educational manual. So you start to think, for me, I start to think, what would make me like this photograph if somebody else did it? I don't particularly try and hit what I think other people will like, but I hope that if I find something that I think is unique in it, that people will also respond to that. So it starts to be, here is a landscape. How can I photograph that landscape in a way that is different? And particularly if it's a beauty spot that tons of photographers are doing, you might end up with hundreds of pictures that all look very similar, beautiful, but all very similar and indistinguishable from each other. But if you think about, how can I make this different? How can I make this me? Then I think that's when you start to get into that sort of artistic. You're thinking about the composition, you're thinking about what's different about it. So yeah, I think then it becomes more than just documentary, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. What do you think has been the greatest influence on your work? Is it a person, a place, a moment in time? What sort of things have really grabbed you by the heart and said, okay, this is something that I really am passionate about looking at?
Oh, isn't that a lovely question? I'm normally like an interviewer. So hearing that question is, that's a really good question. That's going to make this thing. It's a really good question. Yeah, I think maybe unusually, I wasn't really into anybody else's photography when I started taking photographs. People would mention certain photographers and I hadn't particularly heard of them or seen their work. And so I just did what I liked. And I think you're right, because in terms of the North Pennines, which I photographed a lot because we moved out here about a decade ago, and that was what I was around the most. That did start to grab us by the heart, because I grew up by the coast and I live in Britain. We're a small island. You're never very far away from the sea. But to me, the sea has always been a place that if I'm having a bad day, it'll make it better. If I'm having a good day, it'll make it better. It's always nice to be by the sea.
Absolutely.
It was very different to be in an area that, if people don't know, it's a sort of mountain range, kind of hills, really. Lots of hills, big hills, lots of big open stretches, big skies. It was very different to being at the coast, because you could just find something very different in any corner that you went. It spans 3 counties, so it's quite a big area. And I think I just started to slowly fall in love with the various aspects of it. And the bit of us that loves history was interested in, there was a lot of mining up here. Now, mostly coal mining as you get further towards the coast, but then inland, a lot of lead mining. And there are still lots and lots of remnants of the lead mining industry dotted around the North Pennines. And that became a complete fascination. So as we were driving around, you would see an unusual building or you would see some headgear. And it's, wow, photographically great, but also, why is that here? I'm interested in that. And so I think yeah, exactly. Why is this here? And so I started to, I really fell in love with it. And I think some parts of it seemed so remote that you actually start to feel a little bit like you're exploring it, like you're the first person ever to be there, which of course you're not, but you feel like that a little bit. And there's excitement in that, I think.
Oh, definitely, yeah. I think anywhere where you can look at abandoned mine workings and those industrial areas, I think are absolutely fascinating, because you do have that sense of exploring, whether or not you are, as you said, the first or the last person to see it. It is, I think the abandonment of it gives it a certain sense of adventure, because the fact that nobody works there anymore, nobody's using it anymore in the way that it was used originally, and going and looking at those sorts of places really start to make you think about the people that were there. Was it 50 years ago this happened, 100 years ago, 200, 2,000 years ago? I love a Roman ruin, for example.
There's a lot of those around here as well, actually.
Yeah, no, I know. I've been to the UK several times, and every time I go, I was actually up at Banbury Hill down in just into Dorset, I think. It's on the border of Dorset and Sussex, I think. And so, sorry, Hampshire, not Sussex.
I don't know my counties when I get south, so that's fine.
But going and seeing that and thinking, okay, somewhere between 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, somebody's actually got a group of people together and built this hill fort, these concentric rings around a hill of ditches and embankments. And I just find that sort of stuff fascinating. Why were they there? Why did they choose that spot? And what was the purpose of those places that they existed in before?
I think in many ways, sort of history is inconceivable, isn't it, in some ways? So you can know and understand the history from books or from being told. But I think there's something about when you go to the landscape and it's around you and it's tangible, you can connect to that in such
feel the scale of it. You can actually feel on a Roman ruin, you can feel a piece of wall and you can say some bloke 2,000 years ago or woman 2,000 years ago had leant against that piece of wall or put a bit of graffiti on it or whatever.
And you become part of the story for having been there.
Yeah. I just find that sort of stuff absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, me too.
I'm interested, do you have goals in your photography? I guess it's a bit obvious that you probably do, because if you're doing photography for an article, you've got a purpose and you've got to go and capture that area for what it is. But do you have a process for setting yourself goals around, if you say need to do an article, where are you going to go and how am I going to work out how to capture both the words and the images that I need for that? How do you go about setting yourself those goals and how do you go about achieving them?
I'm probably going to contradict myself several times here because in some respects, I don't have goals with a lot of the photography that I do. It's one of the few areas of work that I've managed to keep for my enjoyment and pleasure that doesn't get ruined by having to do stuff for other people, which is really nice. But on the other hand, the times when it is work and I'm doing things for magazines and stuff like that, yeah, there's thought in that. But often it's places that I know quite well anyway. And so it becomes like a natural extension of I know what I'm going to write about. And so I need pictures to demonstrate those words. And so it's not a huge thought process. But I think in personal goals, I try and have a different goal every year at work. And one year it was to try and get work for magazines, which I did, which I was very happy about. No. And then last year it was, I would love to produce something that is purely photographic that people can have to buy. And that ended up being the Transporter Bridge in Middlesbrough. I'd been documenting that for no reason for a decade. And I thought it's time that I turned this into something. So why not turn that into a zine? And so I did that last year and it was really popular. And you think, why do people want my pictures over 10 years of this random kind of transporter bridge in Middlesbrough that doesn't even work anymore? But people have real connections with these things. And it might be somebody who just loves photography. It might be somebody who's very kind and likes your work. So they just want to support you, which is lovely. Yeah. Or it might be somebody who's got a real passion for bridges. And there are lots of people like that out there who have really niche interests. And it's like you just happen to hit their particular niche.
Even that particular bridge, I think I remember seeing either a documentary or some kind of thing about it. This was probably 10, 15 years ago when I saw it. And I know the bridge you're talking about, and it's a bizarre structure too. And so I think there's probably fans just of that bridge. Very niche.
Yeah, totally. It reminds me of, what is that thing in RoboCop with the big legs? It's like from RoboCop or from Star Wars or something. And I don't know if you know this, but there is actually a bit of a funny story attached to it. So there was a program many years ago when I was young called Our Vida Same Pet, which was a lot of Newcastle actors.
Jimmy now.
Exactly, yeah. Kevin, oh God, I can't remember his name, but yes, that. And one of the episodes was where they dismantle the Transporter Bridge in Middlesbrough and they take it to, I think, Arizona or something to put it across the cliff there, to transport people across the cliff. And it was apparently so convincing, the sort of rudimentary special effects from the 90s or whatever it was, or the 80s even, that people wrote in to the radio station and said, is this real? I can't believe they've sold our bridge. And they honestly thought that the Transporter Bridge had gone to Arizona, which obviously it has not because I photographed it. So it's
sorry, we went off on a tangent about
we
bridges.
did, sorry.
We were talking about goals and goal setting, and you were saying you've basically put this body of work together, photographing it over 10 years. And I really applaud that sort of commitment because it is the sort of thing that does get people that are interested in some of those niche areas quite excited because they see it over time, whether it's decaying, whether it's being maintained, whatever. And I think seeing something over time is, again, more than just artistic. It's actually creating a historical record of that piece of architecture, or that, in this case, the bridge. And for me, it's really interesting hearing about why people do that and how you pulled that together.
Yeah, I did a similar thing with the second zine that I did, which was documenting the ruins of the North Pennines. So a lot of lead mining ruins, but also old farmhouses and things like that. And again, you've hit the nail on the head, really, because for me, the fascination in continuously photographing even the same structures across the seasons, across the years, it is very much a documentation of the passage of time. And you start to see the roofs crumble away and walls that just had cracks in them when you first started to photograph. And now the entire structure has collapsed, bigger and bigger. And there's a real fascination in that for me, and I think for other people as well. And they connect with that, which is fantastic. But again, I documented them for about 10 years and thought, I've got hundreds or thousands of pictures. What am I going to do with these? And so it became another goal, if you like, to put those together into a zine, which is how I ended up with Changing Landscapes, Ruins of the North Pennines zine that I released this year. And it all sold out in 2 weeks. So it's really funny what connects with people, because they just absolutely loved it, which is lovely.
Yeah, excellent. Is the Pennines one of your favourite places, one that you keep going back to, or is it more the coast that draws you? I'm interested in, because they're quite different landscapes and quite different subject matter in those landscapes.
Yeah, they really are. And I love both. I think I probably spend more time in the North Pennines because of proximity to it. The coast, it's weird because I find the coast difficult to photograph sometimes. So I like it on an atmospheric day when you've got a bit of sea fret and it's a little creepy and spooky. I find that much easier than I don't know what to do with a sunny day. Like any photograph of the beach on a sunny day, and it just all looks the same. So when it's nice weather and people say, oh, are you going to photograph the coast? It's like, no, I don't know what to do with a nice day. I like it when it's a little bit spooky. And I think with the North Pennines, you can always find an area of it. Even in the summer, you can go up to the tops and it will be bitterly cold, but there'll be something different about it. There'll be frost, or there'll be mist, or there'll be interesting wildlife depending on the time of year. You can find, if you want a forest, you can have that. If you want a waterfall, you can have that. If you want a big expansive moor, you can have that. And I think the variety in the North Pennines really appeals. And I can spend hours either driving around to various places to try and photograph something new and interesting, or I can just walk around and take photos and not particularly think about it, but hope that maybe something has come out of them as I do it. So I think for me, the pressure is off, because I don't feel like I have to take good photographs and I can just enjoy being in the moment. But also because of the nature of how it looks, I probably will get a nice photograph out of it, which is great.
That's marvellous. You mentioned trying to find unique subject matter or unique images. How do you go about doing that? Because, as you say, some places are very much photographed. And I know here in Sydney, trying to find a unique shot of the Opera House or the Harbour Bridge, for example, next to impossible. It is possible, but very close to not being possible. How do you go about it in areas like the Pennines, which do get a lot of photographers in?
Yeah, that's another good question, because it can be really difficult. And I think at first, when you photograph anywhere, you tend to photograph what everybody else has already photographed, because those are the spots you've seen online. To go there, you think, oh,
hot spots that way because they look beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. And so everybody gravitates to those same spots, and I think that's fine. But then I think if you want to go further and you want to really get to know a place, for me personally, the very first ruins that I photographed were ones that were by the roadside, which is obvious. We would drive past, I would say, there's a house, and I would jump out and I would photograph it. But then quickly, you've got the same kinds of images again and again, and you think there must be more of these things that people haven't found yet, or not many people have found yet. And I started to get ordnance survey maps from years and years and years ago of the North Pennines, sort of ancient ordnance survey maps that had been reproduced by a local guy here who does a fantastic job, and spreading those out on the office floor and thinking, okay, there were lead workings here. Yeah. There might still be something here. And so it would become almost a game where I would mark some spots on the map and we would drive as close as possible, and then we would walk across hills and over farmers' walls and squeeze through trees and bushes. And I say we because my poor long-suffering partner comes on all of these.
Oh, no.
He's very good. So he would come with us and we would go through all of these sort of almost like comic escapades in all weathers to try and get to these new buildings. I say new, obviously crumbling buildings, but new to me. And that was like almost an addiction, because if I was right and we would come out into this fantastic ruin, which would happen quite often, the thrill of that was just great. And then you would explore online and there weren't any or many other pictures of those ruins. And so you do feel like you've got something relatively unique.
Nice. What does success look like in your photography?
Oh, I don't know because I do photography for me. The success is if I can keep doing photography and not sicking myself of photography. And actually on that, so I mentioned that I got a D90 early on. That gravitated to D800 when I got better at photography and needed something better. After that, it started to become a chore. I would find that carrying the heavy camera and all of the lenses and thinking, oh, I've got to change lenses, it started to become a chore. And I thought, that's not what I want really. And so I picked up a little Canon PowerShot, the 1X Mark III or something like that, which has got great capability, but it is this big. It's built like a tank, but it's tiny. That changed everything. I started to take it everywhere. I started to photograph lots again. And so in some ways for me, that was a success because I'd managed to reinvigorate my love and desire to do photography, which had waned a little bit with the effort of having to take stuff with us because I was getting sore shoulder, sore neck. I was tired. I couldn't be bothered, which sounds terrible, but this little camera changed everything. And what's even better is, I think because of the ease of it, I started to take photographs that I knew I wouldn't have taken if I had the D800 with us. I started to walk the streets of East Coast Durham and document those, which I wouldn't have done with a big camera because chances are you get confronted because you look like you're doing something.
Professional photographer, yeah.
And yeah. And sometimes, understandably, in certain areas, people don't like that. They think, what are you up to? Kind of thing. And I totally get that. But I think having the smaller camera, it just takes away those potential sort of suspicions and confrontations, which again makes you use it more because you're not worried about bringing out this little camera to do things. And so I think that for me was a success, if that's not a cheap way to get out of the question.
No, it's definitely not. Everybody has different motivations and everybody has different ideas about it. For some people, it's commercial success. For others, it's personal gratification out of creating an image they like. And, I'm just fascinated by the various things that motivate people and why they do what they do and why they choose to do things in certain ways. I think that's really interesting what you're talking about, moving to the little point and shoot. It also proves that it's not the gear that matters, and it really is the photographic eye that you have and the ideas that you have around composition and the compositions you choose. And also, to be honest, I've actually got 3 or 4 of the old power shots sitting on the shelf behind me. And you're quite right. They're built like a tank and they just work and they produce lovely colours as well, which is something that why Canon, I think, has been as successful as they have. Their sensors actually create nice colours. But I think using that kind of gear makes a big difference, as you said, particularly if you're doing things like street photography and so forth, where you're actually able to be a bit less noticeable.
Yeah, a bit more discreet, and you're not even. I don't particularly take photographs of people, but sometimes they'll be in a shot and they can really make it in terms of adding perspective and things. But I never like to be somebody who is getting in someone's personal space. We all know those photographers, and that's not the person I want to be.
No, fair enough. I'm interested in, do you see the use of your photography in particular landscapes and around things like the transporter bridge, that people start to look at those images as part of an effort to help conserve some of those areas? And is conservation a part of your thinking when you're creating those images?
I wish they did, but I think on the whole, no, they don't see it like that.
Okay.
And actually, a lot of people, they don't see the appeal in it at all, which I find really interesting. So they go, oh, why would you want to photograph something so ugly, something that's decaying, something that's a blight on the landscape? And it's funny because like, obviously it's their opinion and they're entitled to it, but it couldn't be more different from how I feel about it, because I think these things often add interest to the landscape.
Totally. Yeah.
And I think it's funny because I suppose maybe a lot of us go through this in the early days, particularly with landscape photography, if that's what you're interested in, where you think you have to photograph something pretty because that's what landscapes are. That's what people want. They want to go, oh, look, here's a lovely shot of whatever. And I had a friend who got really into photography, or was trying to get really into photography, and got some lovely kit. And then he gave up on it because he said, I don't go anywhere pretty, so there's no point. And I thought, that it's a valid point, because I think you can get caught up in that when you very first start. And I do think that's something that maybe you have to push past and say landscape photography doesn't necessarily have to be pretty. And I think if you can find the beauty in other things, if that doesn't sound a bit like a Hallmark card, if you can find the beauty in those things, you can make something that's really appealing to a lot of people and also really unappealing to a lot of people.
Yeah, it can be polarizing. I've got to admit, I really do admire people that can take images of like a supermarket car park or a service station and make it actually look beautiful in its own way. It's not necessarily a beautiful object, an upturned shopping cart in a car park or a skip bin behind a row of shops or something. But in its own way, the colours, the shapes, the lights, the play of light and the shadows and that sort of thing can actually make it not just technically a nice photo, but also a beautiful photo in its own way. And I just find it's not something that I personally feel I can do well or well enough that I want to show people some of those. It's not to say I haven't tried. They're just not my thing. I'd much rather be at a seascape or a waterfall or a mountain range or something like that. That's more me. But
I know what you mean, though. Those places, they do have appeal. And I think it's because we know those places and we understand those places because we all go to those places regularly. Like you say, it's the supermarket car park, it's the petrol station, it's whatever. It's this everyday life. But the way some people photograph them, they become this sort of almost ethereal, like liminal space, particularly when they don't have people in them. That's really appealing to me. Places that are normally full and busy with people and very transient, like service stations, that kind of thing. But then to see them without people, there's, I don't know, an almost post-apocalyptic kind of edge to that. It's really...
Yeah, I get it. I think I personally think it's really hard to make good photography in that. And it is certainly for me anyway, something that I see as very much a challenge. I was talking to Marcus Bell a few weeks ago on the podcast, and he has a series that he took in the United Arab Emirates of street signs in the desert. So you just see this flat sort of desert horizon with sand. You might see a strip of asphalt with some markings on the road and an Arabic stop sign saying stop in Arabic, or a speed limit sign or something. And that's it. That's the entire shot. Crystal blue sky, sand, bit of road, and a stick with a sign.
Yeah, that is...
Being able to actually see that in the first instance and then compose that and put it together just blew my mind a little bit, because it is something that looks completely... He said on the podcast that when he went out, he was with somebody else and they were saying, why are you taking photos of that?
Yeah, I get that a lot, actually. I must take photos of things that people think are a bit weird. Because somebody will come over and they're looking to see if, I don't know, if there's like some kind of unusual bird on the thing that I'm taking or something. And it's like, nope, I'm just taking a picture of this kind of random sign or this petrol station or whatever. But I do think that there's real appeal in that. And it's people in place, isn't it? The people don't necessarily have to be there, but it's the signs that people have been there. They have altered this landscape in some way, whether that's a sign in the desert, so you've got this beautiful landscape, and then a sign of obviously habitation there, or whether you've got a crumbling ruin in the North Pennines, so this gorgeous sort of almost barren landscape, and then there's just a really big farmhouse there in a state of decay, and you just think people have been here. Why, how, when? And that for me is just fantastic.
Yeah. What is it that I guess keeps driving you to continue along those lines? Obviously, it's something that you're passionate about, but for me, to keep going back to the same sort of area takes more than just a passion for something that you love. That is definitely a part of it. What are the things that you are saying or the voices in your head saying you haven't finished doing this? What are the things that keep you going and keep you getting back to that same spot?
I feel like, I hope anyway, that I will never get tired of doing that. Who knows? I might. I think the driving force at the moment, and it still feels like it hasn't been a very long time. It's been a decade and it still feels like it hasn't been a very long time, which is great because I'm still very keen to do it. But I think going in different seasons is a real appeal. So if I was going in the same weather, the same season all of the time, that would quickly lose its appeal for me.
Sure.
But if you can get up to the same places that you went to in the summer, if you can get there in the winter when there's snow on the ground, it's a very different place and it's a very different photograph that you'll end up with. And then also, I guess, still the adventure and the exploration. So even if you go back to the same place, you're still finding different stories there. And for example, there's a ruin up on the North Pennines, Hunston with Moor, this huge open great ruin. And I've been up there many times before and I'd photographed it many times and it's a great walk. So that's a reason to go. And it's also a huge structure. So it's really nice to photograph. But one time I went up there and there were two other men up there on a walk. And one of them was chatting to me and said, "Did you know there was a murder here in the 1800s? And I said, "No." And he told us the bare bones of the story. And I went away and immediately started researching this and found out that a family called the Snowball family had lived there. It was a farmhouse. And one time it would have been on the Lead Road, as they called it, the main road to Newcastle. Now, of course, it just looks like it's in the middle of nowhere, but it would have been on a very busy track once upon a time. And it was I think it was 1880, the son of the owner of the house. The owner was John Snowball. The son was Robert Snowball. Robert went out to visit some friends and never came back. So Jane, the housekeeper, goes out the next morning and finds Robert dead in the byre, presumably from the hammer that's lying next to him. He's got a head wound. And this is all true. This is all completely documented. There are court cases online and everything. And long story short, the investigation gets bungled. And even though the housekeeper is arrested because her and the dad are the only suspects, she is eventually acquitted of this. And so they never find or convict the person who killed Robert Snowball. And it's things like that. So I ended up writing an article for a magazine about this story many years later. And it's things like I would never have known that if I hadn't gone back to the house that time and the guy hadn't spoken to us. We went up another time and it was just after Halloween. And obviously the kids had been up there because it's a great spooky place for kids to go. And there were things that kind of dotted around. Not that I think people should litter the landscape, but there was like a little creepy doll and some fireworks that they'd left behind. So it was just evidence of people having been there that then became part of the house's story, which again just really appeals to me. It's a different aspect every time.
Yeah, nice. Talking about running a business. Now, I know it's not purely a photography business, but running a business and with a partner, you've got to wear a lot of hats. You've maybe the CEO or your partner might be. I don't want to start a fight with who the boss is, but I'm quite sure it's you. Someone's the CFO, someone's the chief marketing officer, somebody's the person that's actually putting together all the creative pieces in your circumstance. And I guess being able to share the load makes it a lot easier, but you've still got to wear a lot of hats. How do you balance all of those along with the rest of your life?
Yeah, that's another good question. I think the only way to run a business is to wear a lot of hats. I often get people asking, how do you manage to make a living in a creative industry? Because it's very difficult. And I tell them it's by not just doing one thing. So luckily, me and Mark, my partner, it's just the two of us who run our business. And we had very similar skill sets when we met, which was very useful. And when we started up the business, we managed to amalgamate all of those skills into something that could produce outputs that people wanted to pay for. So that was documentary films, occasional photography of things, writing articles, history books, that kind of thing. So it's doing many things, and I think having many skills, which you have to obviously build up over time. And it's the combination of all of that makes it work, I think, because we both work very hard, but we also love what we do. And so in terms of when you said, how do you balance that with the rest of your life? I suppose we don't, which is not what I would always recommend. We don't, because we absolutely love what we do. So we do find that if we decide we'll have a holiday, and I put it in inverted commas because it's never a holiday. It's always, oh, we're going to film this. Yeah. And so it becomes, oh, there's this bit of history in this place. So we might be able to turn that into a project. No. So I think it's always there, but in a positive way. And we've got an office that we work from home, which is what I'm in now. And I think if you can as well, having that separate room in the house is quite a healthy thing, because in some ways you can shut the door on that. So we're always very keen to not just have laptops and work in different parts of the house and feel like we were never disconnecting and having home life and work life. So as much as it does, it bleeds into everything, which we're both okay with. We're also keen not to let it completely dominate. And I think that's a symbolic shutting the door on something. If we're having some time off or we're having a weekend off, I think that really helps if someone can manage it.
Yeah, I think that's a very healthy attitude to have, is that you have to have somewhere where you can just, as you say, shut the door on it. And I'm not at work right now. Not that work is ever a place.
Yeah, the thing is as well, you probably know this, because if you've got an office at home and you work from home, there's an adjustment period that everybody else has to make, particularly prior to the pandemic when working from home wasn't the norm, where they just think, oh, Mark and Maria in the house all day will pop over for a coffee. That's lovely, but also we've still got to be disciplined with our work time. And again, I think that's important. You should be flexible, and you should be kind to yourself, and you should take opportunities when you can get them. If it's a sunny day and you can afford to, have that day off. Take your time while you can get it. I think you also need to be disciplined. People will say things like, it must be great to roll out of bed in your pajamas and start work. And I think if I did that, again, for me, the separation between home and work wouldn't be there. So we make the get up at the same time, have a shower, get dressed in proper clothes rather than pajamas, and have it at a time when we work and a time when we stop work as much as we can. And I think that creates a healthy balance, I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the documentary making, and I'm interested in how either the documentary making has influenced your photography or the photography has influenced your documentary making. Which way does it go? And it probably runs both ways.
It does run both ways, because I was doing photography, obviously, long before we started business. We'd both worked in radio, so we both had a lot of audio experience, which obviously the audio, the video, which came in a bit later, and the photography, they're all in the same orbit, aren't they, in terms of things that creative people are doing. And I think, I was able to bring my kind of knowledge and expertise of shots that would look pleasing to things. And Mark had very specific ideas of what he wanted to do. And at first we thought we'd be making commercial stuff. We thought that's where the money would be. We'd be doing soulless commercial work and documentaries, historical documentaries, which is what we wanted to do. We thought that would end up being like a more of a passive thing or a hobby. And thankfully, it turned out not to be like that at all. So we were able to initially make some things, because we believe in show, not tell. So you've got to show people what it is you can do. And I think people don't always know that they want something till they see it, and then they go, yes, I want that. So we started to put together some really, Mark cringes at them now, it's progression, some really rough little documentaries. And we were able to get a little bit of interest in that. And then we started to make contacts and be introduced to people. And by contacts, I just mean local history groups and really lovely people who were doing a lot of hard work on the ground to promote and share their local history. And without those people, I don't think we would be able to be in business, because they're so passionate that they put so much effort in to do things like to get funding to make a documentary, which we're then able to do for them, which becomes legacy for their project. So just as a quick example, at the moment, we're making 2 documentaries. One is on John Walker from Stockton, who was the inventor of the friction match, the stripeable match. He was the inventor of that, which is so interesting. And another one that we're making is a group in County Durham came across 3 diaries from a lad who'd lived in their village in sort of 1912, 1913, 1914, just prior to the First World War. And those diaries are a lovely little snapshot of life in the village at that time. And so we're making a documentary on that as well. And so these sort of interesting projects kept coming up. And we kept obviously expanding our knowledge and our expertise, and hopefully have always been improving. So yeah, I think it was a mix of both. We had some initial skills and knowledge that we were able to apply to the work we were doing. But then in doing the work, it ends up informing things like, if I'm documenting just photographing now, I'll be thinking along lines of, how would I be doing this if I was filming it? What is going to be the interest in this in the same way? Yeah, I think they bounce off each other.
Yeah, yeah. Do you do much, I guess, video work when you're out doing photography, or is it more just, this is a photography trip and that's what I'm doing now, so I don't do the video along with it?
Yeah, I don't really. It's funny. Really, Mark is the videographer, even though we'll often be out with two cameras if we're doing documentary stuff. And I'm quite happy to run one of the cameras and things.
Yeah.
But I've no real interest in videography. Mark is as delighted at editing together a video as I am at editing together a series of pictures. He's awful at taking photographs, which is really funny. He will take a terrible photograph. I'm really awful at video. If I try and handhold video or something, the horizon line's off and it's wobbly. And so it's really funny that we're both not really that good at what the other person is good at. But in combination, it works really well. So I tend not to do any videography when I'm out and about because, frankly, I'm pretty awful at it.
It's not nice to have complementary skill sets so that you're not treading on one another's toes, if nothing else.
Yeah, definitely. And a lot of people say, oh, how do you work together? Is it ever competitive? And honestly, it's not really. Mark's incredibly supportive of anything that I do, and I hope vice versa. And we try and build each other up and help each other where we can. And we're often getting each other work as well. I suppose I'm often getting work that then Mark has to do. It's slightly unbalanced. But yeah, we try and build each other up. And I think those skills being complementary, but each of us being good at our particular thing helps the whole thing to work well.
Nice. Have you got a story from in the field where, and I'm talking photography now, where things didn't go quite as planned, but something unforgettable still happened?
Nothing completely outstanding, because I think stuff always goes wrong, and you have to get into the mindset of either not pre-planning what you think might happen and being a little bit more relaxed about it, which I think helps. Or something does go wrong, you've got to roll with those punches and adapt. You can't think if something is a failure, because you're just never going to get anything out of it if you think of it as a failure. You can think of it as a learn for next time. So stuff happens and you think, okay, now I know I wouldn't do it this way. And that's fine. I think in terms of stories from the field, because I'm often in places where there aren't any people, the biggest sort of unexpected thing is normally animals. Yeah. So sheep, who are just the cutest and most docile of creatures, can scare the absolute bejesus out of you if you are in the middle of nowhere and you look into a ruined house and this little face pops out. That's always fun. And there's been numerous times when there have been a herd of cows with new calves. And cows are very nice and very placid, but of course you have to be careful not to get in between a mother and a calf, because the whole herd can trample you. So if there's also a bull in the field, there's some added jeopardy there. And there have been many times when I've had to go the long way around something because the bull is slowly circling where you are. And you just think, I don't want to get involved in this. I just want to stay away from you. So it's normally the animals, but I've also fallen over comically quite a lot of times, whether it's climbing a wall, walking across wet grass, walking across snow. I've fallen over a lot of times. I think if anybody was documenting me, documenting the North Pennines, it would turn into more of a comedy.
Fantastic. It's one moment in your photography where you truly felt awe, like the landscape reminded you of how small we are in the grand scheme of things.
All the time. It's never not on my mind when I go out, particularly the North Pennines, particularly because you've got these wide open spaces where you can not see another person for miles. You've got big skies and you just think, wow. In some ways you feel very insignificant, but then in some ways I think that's reassuring because it puts things into perspective. You can be very stressed out, you can have a lot going on, and you can get out there into these incredibly beautiful spaces, and particularly when you see ruins and things and you think about all the people who've gone before and the stories, and it's like you are just a small part of this story, which is both terrifying but also awe-inducing, and I think a little bit reassuring. But I'm here, one day I won't be here, and somebody else will be documenting maybe my part in the story. Yeah, it's always there, I think.
That's nice. What do you think photography has taught you about nature?
Ooh, that is a good question. I think people sometimes don't respect it like they should. I've noticed that particularly since the pandemic, the way that the North Pennines has been destroyed in places and littered in places is awful. There were the real beauty spots that people discovered during the pandemic when they couldn't go abroad. And I think a lot of people in their mind started to treat those places like they were like Disneyland. They treated them like a park where they could just go and have fun and not think about the consequences and leave behind a lot of debris. I think that mindset is often, I don't want to say not the person's fault, because we all should have some kind of understanding and culpability for what we do.
Absolutely.
But I also think we're perhaps not teaching people why these places are so important and why it's important to respect and preserve them and not damage them. And there were many stories from 2020 onwards of dogs off leads that had attacked sheep and killed them. There were lots of burnt out places where people had those barbecues that are disposable and they just left them there. There was litter everywhere. They had to paint new lines on the roads to stop people from parking and destroying the verges. And it's all of that kind of stuff. And you have to remember that there are little villages in all of these places as well. This is somebody's home. This is where they live. This is where they work. You can't just go in there and trample all over that. It's not nice. So I think, unfortunately, in some ways, seeing the change from pre-pandemic to now has taught us that I think we need to be, I say we, as photographers as well, I suppose, there's kind of a responsibility there to document what we're doing in a responsible way and to educate people about the places so that they feel an ownership of them, which I think would help them want to protect them more than if it's like a space that's an other, somewhere that I just go and have fun and come away from. I think if you can connect with that place and you can respect that place, then you are much more likely to want to be part of the people who take care of that place.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's always a challenge, particularly in these days of social media, when not geotagging is a great thing for places that are remote or may have delicate ecosystems. But I think also beyond that, actually doing more active work around that message of conservation can actually start to change people's ideas around getting out into nature and what they should or shouldn't be doing as well. And educating people is an absolutely fantastic way of doing that. I think more photographers should do that. I don't do a lot of photography in places where there isn't already a lot of foot traffic. So I'm less inclined to worry about if I'm at Bondi Beach, where there's going to be, after I'm there at 6 a.m. in the morning, there's going to be 500,000 people down there at the beach. I'm not too worried about that because the council and whoever's looking after that. But if I'm at a waterfall out in somewhere a little bit more remote, I'm not going to tell you where it is, at least not exactly. General area I might. But I'm also going to say something about if you're going to visit these sorts of locations, then you've got to actually do something a little bit more than just turn up, drop your beer cans or whatever around the place and leave it in a mess.
Yeah, I think in some ways as well, we're sometimes a little responsible for making these places so appealing because people can see a photograph and they can say, oh, I want to go there. And of course, we're in this kind of age of, I don't know, Instagramification, where everybody wants to bob to the local beauty spot just to get a picture or a video for their Instagram or their TikTok. And you think that there's a responsibility there for the people who are showing off these places and documenting them to say, look, this is the appropriate way to behave. And you don't want to be scolding because nobody like that responds to it, but you just want to say, look, we all enjoy these places for a reason, so let's keep them in a way that people can continue to enjoy them going forward.
I'm interested in when people come back from their photography trips, whether they're straight into editing, they leave it for a while. Is it days, months, weeks? What's your sort of practice? Are you straight into an edit after you get back from a trip?
I would love to be straight into an edit. That's my preference. But normally when I come back from somewhere, such a lot of work has built up in the meantime that I often can't get back to it. And as a consequence, particularly this year, which has been very busy, there are several kind of folders of photographs sitting there going, hey, when are you going to get to us? We're here in raw format. Just please do something with us. And I'll try and do one or two so that I can get them out on social media and things, just to see I've done something with some of them. But actually getting into them properly can take months now, which is not my preference.
Okay. I'm also interested in the process that people go through. Are you spending minutes, hours, days, weeks on an image, on a single image?
My process has changed, as I'm sure a lot of photographers has over time. In early days, you tend to go a little bit over the top. Or I did in editing. Oh, I can do all of this stuff and there's filters and oh wow, I can make this colour.
There's a slider, I should move it.
Exactly. And I think part of the process of maturing as a photographer can often be realising that less is more. And you do end up, you dial it back. And I think for me, I use a really ancient version of Adobe Camera Raw with Adobe Photoshop. And those are what I use. And really ancient, you're talking from like 2017 or something. And I do very little now. And part of that is actually what you touched on earlier. The Canon PowerShot has such a beautiful tonality to it. Even in its raw format, it's those lovely Kodak warm films. It's like that. And so actually very little needs to be done with that. So of course there are tweaks that I'll make. The colour profile obviously needs a little bit of adjustment. But then it's more about just bringing out what's there rather than when crazy like I might have done 20 years ago.
So it sounds like fairly quick then.
It is really quick these days, yeah. I'm just whacking in the raw photograph. I nearly said footage. I've got Mark brain today. Whacking in the raw photograph, changing the colour profile, making a couple of sort of minor adjustments, exporting it as a JPEG, and then I tend to save 3 versions of it. I save the JPEG version at full size, and then I'll save it with a white border around, and then I resize that image, the bordered image, to 1700 pixels wide, and that's the one that goes on social media. And I've had a couple of comments in the past from guys on social media who go, oh, you've added a white border, now it's fine art. And it's no, it just means that you can use the same image across all of the social media channels, which all, obviously, as you will know, have different kind of ways of displaying. And it looks okay. Whereas if you just upload it without, you can lose sections in when it crops for preview. So it really is just a functionality thing. But you get people who think that because you've put a border around it, you're trying to claim it's fine art.
I think that's hilarious. Speaking of fine art, do you print any of your work? And if so, how much and how do you go about it?
Do you know, typically I don't because it's just not cost effective. And particularly postage in the UK now is really not cost effective. So I can just about get away with making the zines work if I buy them in big blocks of 100. But with prints, because it's a more sort of bespoke thing, you're left with either having to have lots of them that you've got to store and then obviously sell. Or you're doing like a print on demand thing where some third party site is taking 75% of what you earn from it. And it just becomes, actually, I've got better things to do with my time than that. But occasionally, so for example, I think it was last year, I had a business approach who'd seen some photographs on Instagram that kind of relate to their business in terms of the locality that I'd been photographing in. And she'd said, would you consider making some prints for our new offices? And so I went down there, I had a look. And so I did that. That was worth doing. And for that, I just used a local printer where I could pick up the images and then I framed them myself and did all of that. So it was a lot of work, but occasionally I will do that because it's worth it. But I think in terms of putting prints out there for people to buy, I don't know how other photographers find it. I've heard that people are struggling more to sell prints. I think that's just probably something that I can't get into.
Yeah. I've got to admit, print sales have virtually dried up. I still have my website where you can buy prints, but it's very rare that they sell much now. I think the current economic times, as well as things like the pandemic, I've made a few sales during the pandemic because I think people were just looking for outlets of expression or whatever. But since then, yeah, things have dried up quite a bit for me. I know that personally. I don't know. I know that there are still people out there that are making some money out of prints, but I think you, as you said earlier on, when we were talking about how you structured your business, you've got to have a few more strings to your bow to be able to make a living.
Yeah, and I think you have to be realistic with yourself as well. And I think quite often we can go, this is worth X amount of money, and so that's what I'll sell it for. And no doubt it probably is worth that amount of money because it's your time, your skill, your expertise, the print costs, all of that kind of stuff. But it's also got to balance with what people will pay for that thing. And that's not to say sell yourself short. You could have a bunch of prints that you're trying to sell and they're at a perfectly reasonable price for you, but people will just never buy them. And so I think it's that balance.
Yeah. I think having different options for people makes a difference as well. But yeah, even saying that, it is tough to make a living out of printing.
And I think particularly as well, I don't know if you've noticed this, but I've noticed when I've gone into shops and things, and particularly gift shops, they'll have AI generated images now that they're selling and that people seem to be really into, which I've made my feelings about it online perfectly clear, so I won't start ranting. But I just think, why try to compete with that anyway? If people want that kind of thing, they're going to buy it, and there's no point in fighting against that. But I think we just have to stay true to our own principles.
Definitely. I'm with you on that. How do you deal with times when inspiration is a bit lacking and you're hitting a creative wall and you're thinking, okay, I don't really want to do this anymore, or I don't want to do this now? How do you deal with that, and how do you get around that creative block that's stopping you from doing what you want to do?
I think most people get creative block, don't they? Particularly if what they enjoy doing is also their work. And so it can, like we were saying earlier, it can start to feel like a chore. For me, even though it's really difficult to do, I think don't force it. There are times when if I'm writing, and obviously I know this is about photography, but similar thing, if I'm writing, I'll try and it's just not coming, or I'll write something that I think is really awful. But if I leave it alone for a bit and then I come back to it, I'm great at this again, everything's fine. So I do encourage people not to keep pushing themselves into a place where they hate what they're doing. And it's the same with photography, really. I think if you force yourself to go out with your camera and you force yourself to take pictures, you're actually just punishing yourself, because this is obviously something that you enjoy doing generally. You like doing it or you wouldn't do it. And you've just got to give yourself, I think, that space to get back into it again. And that might be approaching it eventually, like in a new way. Like I was saying, I got a bit like that when I had the D800 and it became too much of a chore. And then I got the Canon PowerShot and that changed things. And so I think sometimes like an adjustment like that can really help. And I suppose it's just whatever it is that has robbed you of your love of it temporarily, have confidence that it'll come back.
Yeah. That's fantastic advice. I love it. Speaking of advice, what's the best piece of advice you've ever got, or the worst piece of advice you've ever got?
Oh, I don't know. I get unwanted advice all the time online, so it's difficult to choose the worst advice.
White borders around your photos?
That's the best advice, obviously. I actually have had people save my photograph and crop it to a point where they think it's better and then resend it to us. And it's like, don't do that. Please don't do that.
Yeah, I'm the same. I posted one, I think it was a waterfall or something, and then somebody replied with a post of it duplicated. So it was kind of like the Rorschach effect butterfly look. And it was kind of like, can you not, please? Because they said, also looks great like this. And I said, I don't think it does, actually. Otherwise, I might have done that myself.
Yeah, you might have thought of that genius movie. It's difficult though, isn't it? Because slightly sidetracking on the question, which I promise I'll come back to.
Right.
So it's a weird industry we're in where people do that, because there aren't many other jobs that I can think of where somebody would go, look, I've improved on that. You hire a plumber to come and put a radiator on the wall and fix it and everything. And then somebody's calling the plumber like 10 minutes later and saying, no, you did an all right job, but actually I've made it better. The plumber would just be like, okay, you have that leak. That's up to you. But it is really weird where people think that they can do this particular thing better than you can, but won't actually just do it themselves. I think the best advice, and I don't know whether I've got this from somebody in particular or whether it's just a general thing that people have said that I've absorbed, I think just do stuff for you. Try and put out of your head how other people might respond to it, what they might think about your work. try and put that in the back of your mind and don't try to pursue something that you think will be what other people want. Do what interests you, photograph what interests you, and photograph what's around you. I think sometimes, a bit like I was saying with my friend earlier, you can get into this mind trap of thinking, I've got to photograph this specific type of thing or I'll never get anywhere. And I think actually what people respond to is authenticity. So if you're doing what you enjoy and you're enthusing about that and you're producing work, it doesn't have to be technically perfect. People will respond to it and they'll say, wow, I love that. Do you have any more of that? And they will, and you'll build an audience. Sounds like a terrible phrase because it's not about that. It's about connecting with people. But I think people get obsessed with building an audience, don't they? And and you have to pivot away from that and think, if I connect with people, the audience will build itself, and try not to think about it in those terms.
Yeah. We touched a little bit on this question. I'm interested, though, in what people think is photography's place in society, and in particular, what the future holds for photography.
Oh, that's a big question, isn't it? And probably not one I can answer in any kind of meaningful way. But I think even in the sort of 20 years or so that I've been dabbling in photography, there have been a lot of changes. And I think you can't really fight that and you have to roll with it. But I don't think that means you have to lose the core of what you do. So that's, again, coming back to AI, I'll sicken myself of talking about AI. People think because everyone's obsessed with it, oh, I must do that, I have to do that. And it's, you don't have to do that, in the same way that there is still a lot of film photographers. They didn't go, I must go to digital. There is still film photographers and there's still a place for film photography. There's a place for digital photography. There's a place for AI. It's just that place is in the bin and nobody's realised that yet. I'll stop ranting on about AI, I really will.
No, that's totally fine.
I think it's like everybody, because of the accessibility of phones and things and cameras being so good now, photography and videography, they've both become really accessible, which I think is fantastic. But it also makes it sometimes harder to cut through the noise. And so that, again, is why I think if you can find your particular weird little niche, like the Transporter Bridge, like crumbling ruins in the North Pennines, which other people might be doing, but perhaps you're doing them in a slightly different way. If you can find that niche, I think that's golden, because people are always going to respond to that. And they're always going to want to see more of whatever it is you're doing. But I think if you try and chase trends, you're just going to be firefighting for kind of the rest of your career, because you're always going to be bouncing to that, whatever that next thing is that TikTok tells you should be doing. So as for its place, I don't know. I suspect because it's rocketing up in terms of what everyone's doing, and we're oversaturated with photography, we're oversaturated with videography, and we're oversaturated with AI. I think that will reach a pinnacle at some point and it'll settle down, and there'll always be a lot of it. But I think we'll each kind of find our place in our community within that, and those will continue, hopefully, to thrive.
Sounds wonderful.
I've made it sound like a utopia. It'll probably be true.
Yeah, I like the sound of that future.
Well, we have to make our own, don't we? We have to make our own.
Absolutely. This is the thing, is that the future is entirely up to us to create. And I think it's interesting. I've had a few people on the podcast say that they have no idea what the future will hold. And I've said to them afterwards, that I won't embarrass people in the actual podcast. I've said to them afterwards, I think the future's entirely up to us, and it might only take 2 or 3 people to do something to create a movement. I was talking to Blake Rudis last week, and one of the things he brought up was that throughout history, there's been these art movements. And I think we're in the middle or the beginning, I'm not sure exactly where, of an AI art movement. And I don't want to call it a digital photography movement because that's probably a little bit too broad. But I think those art movements in history have lasted between, some of them only 5 or 10 years, others for a few decades. And I think photography, and landscape photography in particular, will find its own niche. And one of the key things there is that whilst anyone can actually type in, show me a lovely picture of a decaying house on the Pennines, and have an AI produce, that's not the same as actually going to the Pennines with your camera and recording what is actually there. One is a vicarious pursuit, which is fine if you can't get to the Pennines and you want a picture of the Pennines, a decaying house in the Pennines. But if you have access to go there, bloody well go there, take your camera. And I think that's what I mean about people having the ability to create their own future for photography.
Yeah, I do think it will find its balance. And you're right. I think that there is nothing that compares to going out there and actually doing that. And to reproduce that in an artificial sense sucks the soul out of what somebody might be trying to do with that. But I think also the landscape that you photograph, it's real and it has its story for decades, for hundreds of years, for thousands of years. All of these stories that make up the landscape that you see in front of you. And somebody who has generated an artificial image of a landscape, that is, even if it's meant to be a representation of a real one, it's not. And so it has no story and it has no context. And I think for that reason, most of us just would not connect with that type of image.
Absolutely. What's your favourite thing about being a photographer?
Interacting with male photographers online, of course. No, I'm only kidding. Most people are really nice. It is interesting because it is obviously still like really a male-dominated field. So I think I really enjoy seeing the work of other women photographers. That's really great. There's a fantastic group on Facebook called She Clicks, which is all women photographers. And there's some really amazing work coming out of there. So I think things like that are great. Personally, for me, I think it's just being able to get what is inside my head to somebody else. So I'll have a very particular idea sometimes of when I'm out in the landscape of this is how I see this and this is how I want other people to see this. And for me, if I can make that happen, that's like magic. If somebody responds to that and they're like, wow, I've never seen this presented in this way, or wow, that's really different and I love that. That's magic to me. That is, I've managed to take what is in my head and make it something that other people can appreciate as well. And in some ways, that's also similar with the writing. You're taking something that's inside kind of your mind and you're putting it in such a form that other people can consume and enjoy it. And I think, again, that connection, that's the goal for me, I think.
Fantastic. What about your least favourite thing about being a photographer?
Oh, unsolicited advice, probably. When I used to take a lot of kit somewhere with us, when you look like a professional, when you've got a big camera and lenses, you become a magnet for people who want to talk at you rather than to you sometimes. I love when people come and talk to us. That's great. I can talk all day long. I'm so sociable. I love to chat to people. But there's something about photography kit that attracts sometimes the wrong kind of people. And I noticed that by switching to my teeny tiny camera, I don't get that anymore and it's brilliant. But when Mark goes out with he's got, for sort of stealthier work, he's got a Lumix camera which actually films to the same standard as the Blackmagic, which is our kind of primary camera. And so the raw footage is easy to mix and match because they look very similar. So he'll take that out and it's got all sorts of things bolted onto it because it's obviously there for filming rather than photography. Yeah. But he's become a magnet for photographers. So, haha, it's your turn now. So he gets that. So probably that's maybe my least favourite part of photography. But to keep it in proportion, that is a very small part. It doesn't happen that often, but sometimes it can be disproportionately annoying.
Yeah, it's almost always the one or two negative comments or the one or two annoying things that stand out.
Yeah, it's also when I get this in all walks of what I do, and Mark gets it to an extent as well, but I think me maybe a little bit more, where somebody will say, oh, you should have done this. Yeah. Something like a photograph, or you'll have produced something like an article or a book. And they'll say, I can't believe you didn't do insert whatever their particular niche is here. You should have done this. And my response to that is always like, that sounds like a great idea. You know what? Why don't you do it? And they go, no, I could never do that. And I think if you're in a position where you feel like you can offer advice to the person who has done it, you maybe should have a little try at doing it yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What do you like to do when you're not doing photography or videography or writing articles?
Oh, I'm terrible because the hobbies are also the work. So I just really love to take the camera, take photographs, even if for absolutely no reason. Yeah, so I'm really bad at that. I like reading as well. I like to learn. I've got a very sort of busy mind that always likes to be doing things. I'm not very good at sitting still. And so something that I've been doing over the last 4 years is learning German on Duolingo, which I got to try out for the first time actually this month. This month, yes, it was earlier this month. We went to Germany for the first time since I've been learning German. And I was able to have some, I'm sure terrible on my part, but very basic sort of conversations and make myself understood, which was incredibly satisfying. I love to be able to learn and to do things. So I'm normally either reading or staring at my phone, which people probably think is very ignorant, but it's no, I'm learning. I'm actually learning.
Yeah.
I guess probably just that and also walking when I can manage it now. I like to get out into the fresh air, clear my head and be in the countryside, even if I don't have a camera with us.
Lovely. Are there any photographers that I need to be talking to on the podcast?
You've done a lot of them, which is fantastic. So I'm not sure if I'm going to mention anybody who you might have already spoken to. But Sophie Carr is an amazing photographer who does... Sorry, Grant, I had a hair in my mouth. Can we start that bit again if that's all right?
Yeah, that's fine.
So I don't know whether you've already spoken to these people because you've done a lot of podcasts, which is fantastic. But Sophie Carr, who I know from social media, does a lot of amazing landscape photography, including phenomenal shots of Iceland, and is really demonstrative of that thing we were talking about of lots of people go to Iceland and make fantastic photographs. But Sophie is getting off the beaten track and she is taking photographs of things that people aren't getting. She has a really unique perspective on it.
I had Sophie on the show.
Great. Of course you have. She's fantastic. Why wouldn't you?
She's marvellous. Had a lot of fun talking to her.
Yeah, she seems like a really nice person. I've got a lot of time for Sophie. She's lovely. Have you had David Main on the show?
No, I haven't had David. I've seen
David,
him, haven't managed to get hold of him yet.
David, I know in person now. There's this small group of us. I organised a meetup a couple of years ago from people who knew each other on Twitter, even though none of us are actually on Twitter anymore. We've stayed friends and we meet up regularly in the various places where each of us live. So they come to Durham sometimes. We've been down to Bradford, where Sean, one of the photographers, live. And recently we went down to Cardiff, where David's based.
Nice.
So David does like a lot of fantastic documentation of South Wales and the west of England in black and white. And I think his stuff is really evocative. And he's also just a really nice guy. And another photographer who I must mention is Andrew Jackson, who, I don't know if you've had him on the show already. So he's a British photographer, but he's now based in Montreal in Canada. And his photography kind of describes it as sitting between documentary and art. But the thing with Andrew as well, he's documenting communities in a beautiful way. But his writing that goes alongside those is equally beautiful. He's just got such a caring, warm, empathetic style that immediately comes across. And I think for me, the thing that really puts me off a lot of documentary photography is how exploitative it can be, and how even when you're documenting difficult subjects and difficult situations, and that might be poverty, it might be trauma, it might be whatever, I still think you can do that in a way that lifts the person or the people up and is a reflection of their story, not through your eyes what you have preconceived and want to tell. And I think, unfortunately, there is a lot of that in documentary photography, and it feels very exploitative to me. But Andrew and David, who are documenting, are the complete opposite of that. Their work has warmth and it uplifts the people and places that they photograph. And I think that's really important in documentary photography.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much for that. I've got one more question for you, and it's the one that I've been asking since the beginning of the podcast, and I know a lot of people hang on right to the end to hear this question. Do you like pineapple on pizza?
No, I think you should be thrown into jail for the rest of your life if you have pineapple on pizza. Do you know that is actually one of the ways that me and Mark first connected, which is really funny. We worked together for another company, which is how we met. And they were having a pizza date, and he hadn't got into work yet. And I sent him a message saying that they're having pizza today. What would you like? And I sent him something like, you don't want ham and pineapple, do you? And he replied with, no, that's an absolute crime. And I knew we were going to be perfect together at that point, because ham and pineapple is a crime. It should not be on a pizza. And if anybody had it should, you should delete their podcast immediately.
I'd have to delete the majority of my podcasts because, unfortunately, I think it was I did a count for the 200th episode, and I think it was roughly 55% positive and 46 negative. So I'd have
That's outrageous. There's obviously something that is deeply broken in a lot of landscapes.
Really?
Wait, do you like pineapple on pizza?
I'll eat it if it's there, but I don't order it. But I'm not a fussy pizza either.
You've redeemed yourself slightly by saying that.
My favourite is actually just I guess the classic Napoli with some buffalo mozzarella, some basil, and the tomato. That's it. Just the cheese.
Lovely. Yeah, keep it simple.
Keep it simple. That's probably my favourite. I don't mind one with a bit of meat on it, but I don't have to have meat on it to make it exciting.
My other half, Mark, really likes blue cheese on a pizza, which could a matter of divorce, because I don't mind blue cheese, but when it heats up and it smells, it's the worst thing ever. And if we go to somewhere in Europe, quite often they'll have gorgonzola on a pizza, which they don't usually do in the UK. And he'll always order that, and it's like a cartoon, like Charlie Brown with the kind of the lines coming off. It's like that. I have to move the chair away from it.
I'd love to see that. Thank you very much for being on the show. It's been absolutely marvellous meeting you and spending some time getting to know you a little bit better. Where can people find your work?
And thank you for having us on the show. It's been really fun. And if people would like to know more, I'm pretty much Marie Gardner with an I, Gardiner, on everything. So website is mariegardner.co.uk and Marie Gardner on Blue Sky. I boycott Twitter, but yeah, apart from that.
I'm with you there. Solidarity. I got off Twitter as soon as the Nazi salute got thrown.
Yeah.
That did it for me. Sorry. Not going to support that. Anyway. Thanks very much, Marie.
Thank you.
Have you ever had a place that's so close to your heart that you want to go back and photograph again and again? Comment below and let us know where that is. Thanks again for listening to Landscape Photography World. I hope you enjoyed the show, and keep listening because I'll be joined by some great guests in upcoming episodes. You can find my work in this podcast at gruntswinburnphotography.com. Pardon me. You can find my work in this podcast at having a mare right now. You can find my work in this podcast at gruntswinburnphotography.com, along with prints and photography gear. I'm also on Vero, Photo, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. Don't forget to comment and subscribe because it really helps us get the podcast out there. I'm Grant Swinburne. Hope to see you out shooting soon.